I've burned my orange ties. Well, I'm about ready for gloom, despair, and agony on me, but I don't know. Congratulations to you all who are winners. Yesterday's Tennessee-Florida game was the absolutely worst performance of football I've ever seen. But what do you think, Nick? It's hard. It'd be hard to beat that one. Well, this new coach at UTC has really got them doing well. They play some really good football, so that's great. Billy, congratulations. I guess. You had to experience Alabama not scoring 50 points yesterday. I'm going to take my little grandson to see Tennessee and Alabama. And I'm going to tell him I'm taking him so he'll see a really great football team. It just won't be an orange. He's about the only one I can get to go with me. That's right. That's right. We appreciate having visitors today. David, we're glad that you're back. Hope you're recovering okay.
That's great.
Oh, that's good. We got a lot of people out and a lot of people sick, so we've got a lot of people that are on prayer lists. So, but we're glad everybody's here. I got to meet and talk yesterday to Carolyn Burney's little granddaughter, Laura's little girl. Really precious, pretty little girl. Boy, she didn't know what to make of me. She didn't know if she wanted to talk to me or not. So she'd just look at me and then look up at her mama. Look at me and look up at her mama. I produced a $1 bill. That little girl's still grinning. I made me a big buddy yesterday.
That's bad, and you got to pay kids to be nice to you.
That's right. Or probably she'll get like Bradford. I try to give my grandkids $1 if I've got one. Bradford's got to where he's saying, "Don't forget that $1. Don't forget that $1." And I had a chance to, I'd met your son Lee before, barely, but I had a chance this week to see him in action leading a meeting. He is really a sharp young man, and I'm sure you're proud of him. So I enjoyed spending some time this week with Lee Burns. I used to love my mother's cooking. You could probably tell that. I was amazed whenever I thought she had the best fried chicken of any human being in the world until I started eating Phyllis's fried chicken. That was amazing to me. And my mother could cook for 5 men in the family 3 times a day. That's the way it was in our house. I noticed though that every time that she would cook that she had a drawer, and she had that drawer full of little yellowed and wrinkled and kind of worn out around the edges sheets of paper. And I later learned when we kind of were distributing them out to grandchildren and all that kind of stuff that those had been some of her mother's recipes and some of her grandmother's recipes. And it was really interesting to watch my mother cook. It was like watching some kind of a chemist at work. And so she did everything from scratch, of course. But she had all these little measuring devices, and she'd get all of her stuff out, and she would, you know, level every little half teaspoon up and put it in there and look down and mix it just exactly the right amount of mixes, and get the pans all fixed just exactly right, and make sure that she watched the clock and timed it to the second on whatever she was cooking it in. And that was always kind of a mystery to me. And so I'd sit there and watch her cook because she'd let me, you know, lick the cake pan and all the kind of stuff that little fat boys would like to do. And so I finally got to the place where I asked her, man, you know, it's very clear you can cook, and it's very clear you know what you're doing. And why do you have to get in that drawer and get those recipes out? You surely got those memorized by now. And I think my mother was the first person I ever heard use the word repetition. And so she said, Good cooking is about repetition. And she said, you don't cut corners, and you don't make stuff up, and you don't do it your own way. You don't let yourself get in a situation where you forget something. You do it just exactly like you've always done it. You do it just exactly like your mama did it. You do it just exactly like your grandmother did it. Now, my wife cooks like that. Some of you all probably cook like that. If I get to cooking, I just get in there and start throwing stuff in there. And sometimes I'll leave stuff out. Sometimes I'll make too much of one particular item, but everything's always unique. Doesn't matter what it is, it's never the same way 2 times in a row. It's also never as good as somebody who's really paying attention to what they're doing. My father was like that, not about cooking, but he was particular about stuff. He was real particular about stuff. And if you didn't kind of do it his way, he got real particular about correcting you. But he really believed in having a beautiful yard. And so the first week in the springtime when you mowed it in one direction. The next week you mowed it in the opposite direction. The third week you'd mowed it in a diagonal direction. And then you would repeat that all across the summer. Because what my father hated was grass that would grow up at some kind of a bend, or grass that would grow up at some kind of an angle. And so by mowing it in a repetitious pattern in these different ways, and by doing it exactly that way, then your grass would grow up straight. And it's really interesting how things will kind of get into your mind. And so when I got my own yards and my own lawnmowers, guess what I did, even though the neighbors thought I was crazy, but I had straight up growing grass. And when my son came along and I began to let him mow and began to teach him to mow, he would explain to me how it could be done faster other ways, or he could explain to me how, I was just being kind of old-fashioned. And then I would explain to him, but you want your grass to grow up straight. I was trying to get him to repeat what he had seen me do, what I had seen my father do. Those of us, and that includes lots of us, had coaches along the way. And I bet, Dennis, even though you were in Texas, that your coach's 3 favorite words were the same 3 favorite words of those of us who grew up in East Tennessee. I think the 3 favorite words in my coach's vocabulary were "run it again." And so you would just constantly run these plays over and over and over and over until he achieved what he thought was as perfect as we were going to be. Or he thought we were so dumb that that was the only way we could remember where to go under certain circumstances. I don't think anybody could have been that dumb, but it was constantly run it again, run it again, run it again. One more example, and then we'll see where this is going. When I was about 1/3 of the way through the 2nd grade, there was something that happened very, very importantly in the repetition of our school year and our school curriculums. About 1/3 of the way through the 2nd grade, you moved from making print type letters to cursive. Remember that? And unfortunately, at the exact same time that we moved into cursive, I went through 3 weeks of being out of school. It's the only time that happened in all my life. First it was the mumps. That got me for a week. Then before I got back to school, it was the chicken pox. That got me for a week. And before I got back to school, it was the measles. And that got me for a week. And so during that 3 weeks in which they were learning how to make all of these intricate little circles and all of these slanted lines and all of these staff-looking combinations of circles and lines, I missed school. I kind of recall the teacher taking a minute or two to kind of catch me up, but she was in a hurry, or she had other things to do. And so as a consequence of that, I know people that are my age that have absolutely beautiful handwriting, who can just really do cursive wonderfully. And I'm amazed by that. And my wife can do cursive just wonderfully. And my cursive might as well be Chinese or Japanese or something from some foreign Middle Eastern land. I'm annoyed to my life that I cannot do cursive. I've even gone back and gotten out some old books, and I've tried to start doing that, but I think that maybe the reason they did it at that time was that was the only window of opportunity for your brain to learn how to do that sort of thing. And so because I didn't learn that repetition of being able to do that, you can see it in my awful handwriting until this day. So is that enough to remind you or get you thinking about the importance of repetition? Now I'm going to tell you about a guy by the name of John von Neumann. John von Neumann. I'm sure you got up this morning and with your morning coffee had several conversations about John von Neumann. I expect that probably hardly anybody in America got up this morning and was talking about John von Neumann. Although if you look at some of the most important things that have happened in the last generation of our life on this planet, old John von Neumann is right at the core of it. He was born in Hungary. He was looked upon very quickly as a child prodigy, and so the people of his little Hungarian community got together and got enough money that they could send him to the best schools that were there. Within a couple of years at these best schools, he wasn't learning cursive. He was doing mathematics on the same level as the highest professors in the school. And so by the time he was a teenager, knowing more than any of the professors, they got together at that school and got some money and sent him to the University of Berlin. And so by the time he gets into the 1920s, he is the most up-and-coming young mathematician in the whole world, probably. But luckily, maybe for us, people in this little old town in New Jersey called Princeton found out about John von Neumann. And so they went over there and told him if they could get him in America, would he come and teach at Princeton? And he spent the rest of his life teaching at Princeton. I've thought about that a little bit. There's a good likelihood in our country today that John von Neumann might not have even been let in. But that's a story for another day. But in that time in our country, they were smart enough to know that we all were kind of immigrants in a way, and sometimes these immigrants that came in could make all the difference in the world, and boy did he ever do that. John von Neumann was a mathematical and scientific expert in repetition. By the 1940s, he had already figured out DNA. And so by the 1940s, he was drawing out patterns of human DNA and saying what that would have to look like, and that human DNA could be repeated in a person's body, in any cell in our bodies, and then repeated from one generation to the next. It took almost a half century before scientists could verify what he said, and we could learn as much about our DNA as we can today. And so some of you have gone on Ancestor.com, or some of you have gone on 23 whatever, and you've traced yourself back to whoever and wherever and whenever. John von Neumann was talking about that before the First World War. And so he understood the whole dynamics of repetition. John von Neumann has been very, very helpful with the music industry. You remember when we used to have records? Y'all can go back that far. And we'd get a scratch on a record, and it would trip on us. And all that was so annoying, and it would skip on us, and then we hadn't have any way to fix it or whatever. Or we lived through tapes, and all of us had tape decks, and then sure enough, you'd be right in the middle of a beautiful piece of music on a tape, and that tape would get stuck. And by the time you got that tape stuck, you'd torn it in two, and then it was not much good for anything except to be thrown away. Then they got 8-tracks. You all remember 8-tracks. John von Neumann was responsible for that, because John von Neumann said if you'll take a piece of tape and you'll lay 8 different tracks down on it, then if something happens to one of those tracks, you can still have pretty good music. And then finally, they created these wonderful discs that we have. Do you realize that a song on a disc that we can put into a disc player, if you still do that, a song on a disc is probably on there 300 or 400 times. And so if something happens and you get a little scratch on a disc, you got about 300 or 400 backups because of the repetition that's been put on to that disc. John von Neumann led the way on that. But do you know how he's being talked about today? And this just blows my mind. NASA today is creating a new spacecraft. And it's a spacecraft that they believe that they will be able to send to the outer realms of this galaxy that we're part of. It will have so far to go that we will be getting information back from this spacecraft by the time our great-great-grandchildren are alive. So we should not expect to profit from this very much. But NASA has run into a problem. NASA understands that everything wears out. Even if you've got a knee replacement that's made out of titanium, it can wear out, or in places, everything wears out. So how can you create a machine, NASA says, that can go for literally hundreds of years out into space and function and send back messages and find out information for future generations? How can you deal with a situation where something is kind of going to wear out? And so NASA goes back to John von Neumann. And John von Neumann was talking about, in the 1940s, self-replaceable machines. And so NASA is designing this spacecraft today, and in the middle of this spacecraft are robots. And in the middle of this spacecraft is one of those copying machines that will copy not sheets of paper, but that will copy objects, that will make new parts. And so this spacecraft becomes replicable. And so when it gets to the place that it gets to wearing out, the copying machine comes on and creates a new part. And the robot comes over and takes the part and replaces it. Takes out the old part and melts it down. It'll be used again. When the robots start wearing out, then the machine creates a new part for the robot, and it just keeps going on. Wouldn't it be interesting that if they could create machines that would do that for human beings? But here we are in the 21st century, and people are talking about machines that can replicate themselves and that can go on to infinity, as they used to say on Star Wars. The power of replication, of getting a pattern and being able to follow that pattern in repetitive ways on and on and on and on. What's that got to do with Sunday school? Well, a little bit of everything. In the middle of the Gospel of John, Jesus is coming to the realization, and all those people around him are, that he's going to be around forever. And the disciples are beginning, if you read beginning in the middle of the Gospel of John, the disciples are kind of wanting to know when he's not going to be there any longer. And Jesus doesn't answer that question very much or well. And then these disciples, who finally have figured out there's something pretty special about this guy, are beginning to ask questions about who he really is, what's kind of going on here. And Jesus doesn't have much to say about that. You see, those disciples are a lot like us. It's a very interesting question. Where is Jesus right now, and when will he be back? Or it's a very interesting question. Who in the world was this Jesus really? Jesus wasn't interested in that. And so one day his disciples are all around, and they've been talking about all these mysterious kinds of things. And Jesus comes in. And as was the custom in their world, and especially before they ate, they had this common practice of kind of cleaning up. We kind of do that. And part of that practice was to wash people's feet. And it wasn't necessarily any kind of a bizarre religious ritual at that moment. It was simply a very practical measure of kind of cleaning the dust off somebody's feet, maybe keeping it out of the house, or maybe a nice thing to do for people that were guests that coming to where you lived or where you were going to feed them. I've got a feeling, though, that it was such an unpleasant little task that everybody was waiting around for somebody else to do it. And then the Bible tells us in the 14th chapter of John that Jesus picks up the kind of vessel that's got the water in it, and Jesus picks up the washing rags and the drying rags, and Jesus begins to wash their feet. And oh, they're embarrassed by that. They're probably poking each other. I told you to go ahead and wash feet. Now look, Jesus is having to do it. And they get embarrassed by that. And finally, one of the disciples says, wait a minute here, Lord. You don't need to be doing this. Let one of us do that. And then Jesus does talk to the disciples. But he doesn't talk to the disciples about when he's leaving and when he's coming back. And he doesn't talk to the disciples about who he is and where he fits into the theological chain of the universe. Jesus says to the disciples, I have given you an example that you should also do as I have done. I've given you an example that you should do as I have done. You see what Jesus was saying? Jesus was saying that more important than any questions about the end or the return are questions about doing as he had done. Jesus was saying that more than any questions about where he fit into the theology was doing what he had done. In other words, you see what Jesus was doing? He was kind of trying to be a spiritual John von Neumann. Or he was trying to kind of be a spiritual my mother with her recipes, or my daddy with his mowing, or he was kind of trying to be a kind of an emissary of my coaches with running it again. Jesus was saying, I've given you an example. Now go replicate that. I have served. I've got down here on my knees and I've washed your dirty feet. Now replicate that. Jesus says, I found myself in a situation where something really humane needs to be happening. And I've given you an example. Now go replicate that. Well, the disciples don't give up on their questions. And as you continue in the Gospel of John, they're trying to get really philosophical and mysterious almost at times with Jesus. And finally, Jesus gets tired of it. You can tell that from the text because he says, truly, truly. That was a word like in the South when we say, now watch this. Which means we're going to drive something real fast or set something on fire. Or it's like in the South when someone says, hold my beer a minute. We know something's getting ready to happen. And so when Jesus says truly, that's kind of to get people's attention. But when he says truly, truly, that's really to get someone's attention. And so Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do. That's Jesus becoming a spiritual John von Neumann. He's saying, works that I've done, that's what you're supposed to do. And it may even be possible that you'll be capable sometimes of doing more than I could do. You see what Jesus was trying to do? He was trying to teach his disciples, and it comes down to us, that what is important is kind of spiritual repetition. And kind of trying to look at the life that Jesus lived, and kind of trying to look at the things that Jesus did with others, and to see that as a recipe. A very exact recipe, but not for cooking or mowing or riding or running football plays or building NASA machines, but a statement of how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live. We're supposed to replicate Jesus. And that doesn't necessarily mean curing lepers or curing blindness. Those may be extraordinary even for Jesus' time. That may mean doing something as simple as helping someone be cleaner, or bowing ourselves in a little bit of submission to the deeds that need to be done and the people that need to be helped, even if it comes to something as seemingly mundane as washing someone's feet. Now, I'm not asking you to get in a line back here and wash David's feet, because he probably can't get to them quite as easily as he did. We'll let you get a hose house to take care of that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that probably today, you and I will have some opportunity to replicate Jesus. That may be speaking with a smile to somebody at the grocery store. That may be taking a moment to wish a happy birthday or send a greeting to somebody that may not be out and around as much. That might be a moment in which we could really get upset about something, but we decide this isn't worth getting upset about. We're going to be nice about it for a change. Of course, then people will fall over on the floor and we'll have to help them up. But I believe that what Jesus was doing, he was teaching us how to cook. He was teaching us how to mow. He was teaching us how to run plays. He was teaching us how to do cursive in a spiritual way, where we served and we helped and we gave. It is our task after 2,000 years to be like that NASA machine that they're speculating about today. It's our task after 2,000 years to still be trying to replicate Jesus. Now I'm going to put an exclamation point on this lesson. It may be more for me than you. I've got this guy that lives over in Greenville who I consider a really good friend of mine. Now, he's not as good a friend of mine as Al or John, but he's a good friend of mine. And we've known each other for 15 years. We've had a business together for over a dozen years. And buddy, you talk about a special kind of human being. This guy is a special kind of human being. He was starting fullback at Clemson for 3 years. I'm sure you'd appreciate that. And he's a man. When he got out of Clemson, he went to business school, and he was recruited from all over this country to come in and to work for these new athletic companies that were coming into existence. And he worked for several, including Rawlings. Then a company started out west called K2 that had outdoor equipment, climbing equipment, skiing equipment, and all of that sort of stuff. He became the CEO of that and was CEO of that for about 10 or 15 years until it sold. He had companies coming from all over the world wanting him to work for them, but he wanted to go home and go back to Greenville and live next to a golf course and help raise his kids, which he did. Except for every week flying out somewhere, usually to Wall Street in New York, to help companies make decisions about where they would move their products, what products they would create, how they would manage their investments, helping companies on a daily basis making multi-million-dollar decisions. Why he wanted to get involved with me, I have no clue, but boy, I'm glad that he did. On Tuesday, he was scheduled to be on a conference call. and he didn't come on the phone. And people were saying, that's odd, because he never misses a conference call. There was a guy working in his yard that had worked in his yard for 25 years, and when they got through with the work, he'd always come in and he'd have him a Coke or something to eat, and he'd pay him, and they'd sit there and talk about their days at Clemson. And the guy comes into his office, and he's laying there on the floor, and he's unresponsive. He's got a pulse. And so the guy immediately calls the ambulance, and the medics come and transport him to the hospital. So far, he's not had a conscious second. He's on every machine that you could imagine. They're going to decide this week whether his brain's dead, and you know where that goes. But they're already telling his wife and his 2 teenage kids, even if he makes it, you all will have to get ready for months, if not years, of recovery. And your father and your husband will never be functional again like he was. And he may never experience the world or you like he has. I'm praying every day for my friend. That breaks my heart. He's about 66 years old, and he's probably in shape that he can go carry the ball today. His brain blew out on him. Now, you know what that says to me? I'm alive today. I got up this morning and saw the sunrise. I went yesterday and watched my grandkids play soccer. I stood with my son and daughter yesterday. Watched a ball game, God help us, with my wife last night. I'm alive today. I'll pray for my friend, and I'll hope beyond hope that he'll be okay in some way. But you know what I get a chance to do today? I get a chance to replicate Jesus. I get a chance to replicate how he was with other people. I get a chance to replicate how he served and how he cared and how he loved. And there's nothing that guarantees me that chance tomorrow. There's nothing that guarantees me that chance an hour from now. And so we should always be busy about our Father's business, being as much like Jesus as the opportunities of life provide us, to be as much in service to others as life provides us, to replicate Jesus into a next 2,000 years. Let us pray. Our Father, we pray for those people who experience all kinds of unexpected tragedies, calamities. And I pray for my friend and for his wife and for their children and those that love him. Some miracle might happen in his life. But help us, Father, never, ever to lose consciousness of the fact that we're alive today. And that gives us a chance to be nice. That gives us a chance to be attentive. That gives us the chance to be kind. That gives us the chance to smile. That gives us the chance to greet others with joy. So help us that we might be concerned, not with where your son is or when he's coming back, not with some issue of where he fits into a theological chain of meaning, but help us that we might be concerned to take his example and to live by it and to replicate it, to do the things that he did, even believing as he believed, that we might even do greater things. We will have opportunities. We do not have to pray for that. Help us to make something Christ-like out of the opportunities that we have. For life is short and life is precious, and we never know. For we ask in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you all for coming today. Charles?
Judy Hacker brought some calendars for if everybody needs to get ahead on 2019. There's several over here. Feel free to pick one up.
That's what I need to do. I need to get ahead on 219.